I think today's leap year, isn't it?
It's leap day. We have
Oh,
a whole
leap.
year of leap year. I actually had to edit a social post to that effect, so
It is
it's on
leap
my mind.
year, and today is the day that it gets
Today is
added
leap
because it is
day.
leap
Yes.
day. But Jeff might be the most informed and educated on leap.
Yeah.
On leaping, yes, after your
Yes,
your
after
conference call
getting,
this morning.
yeah.
Yep, our CEO gave us an orientation on leap year, leap day, leap year. Going back, did you realize that it was a BC discovery by Augusta?
No,
Yeah,
but
BC.
I might add that as one of our follow-up questions. Thanks everyone who's joining in on today's Tech Talk. We wanted to give it just a minute to allow folks to come in because once we hit that start and record button, it does take a minute for everyone to filter in through the platform. But I think we're at a pretty good spot now to get started. So welcome. For those who don't know, I am not Jill Schrader. I am Cece Andrews, a stand-in for as moderator for and hostess for today's Tech Talk. Tech Talk, as hopefully most of you know, is a collaboration between Sage and Tazergy. And we fashion it kind of, although it's I think maybe more fun, but we do fashion this as our own senior living technology version of a TED Talk. So it's we stay on a particular topic, as you know, today is systems selection, but it is conversational. And hopefully you'll find it entertaining and you'll get a lot of takeaways as we tend to with a TED Talk and our Tech Talk. Would like to introduce you. I've introduced myself, Cece Andrews. I'm the founder of Quantum Age Collaborative and a longtime member of Sage, supporter of Sage from the 90s. And really happy to be here and be in a position where I can help out and kick off this conversation. I'd like to introduce you, though, to the brains of the operation here, our two guests, Matt Haywood from Tazergy and Jeffrey Wipf from Cassia. And I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves because they'll do a much better job than me. And they don't have to read it, and I would probably have to read it. And as I mentioned, today's topic is the art of systems selection. And I think there are many of you on the call who might already agree that system selection is an art. And if you don't yet know this, you may have a change of heart or a new perspective 30 minutes from now, let's hope. If you haven't attended a Tech Talk, if this is your first one, know that this is a very conversational session. So unlike we don't have slides, this isn't a big slide presentation. This is a conversation. It is very conversational, and we invite you to, when you have a question or a comment that you want to make, it is still in a webinar on a webinar platform. So please go into the Q&A tab and type in whatever it is you would like to say whenever it is on your mind. We will not be holding questions until the end. If you have something you'd like to add to a point that's being made in real time, I'll be monitoring the Q&A tab so to make sure that we can weave those things into the conversation. The Q&A button. It is in the upper part of your screen, I am told. I am prompted. And then we'll answer your questions through and address your comments throughout the session. At the end of the session, be sure to complete the survey. It's going to pop up on your screen. You'll be hard pressed not to complete the survey. Zoom makes it pretty in your face. But do fill out the survey. Let us know how we did today. And the most important thing that we are going to want to know on top of that is what other types of topics might you want us to address in future editions of Tech Talk? And then this is being recorded. So as you probably were warned when you logged in, but know that we will also be sending a link out to the recorded session, and feel free to share it with everyone. Tech Talk is something we're happy to share with the world to make the industry and the experience of senior living all the better. So please share away, and share once, share often. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists. I'm going to start with Matt, who's our resident tech head, I think, for Tech Talks. I think that would be fair to say. And you can punch me later, but that's what I'm going with.
I am totally good with that. Thank you,
Okay.
Cece. Matt Haywood, founder and CEO of Tazergy. I consider myself really more like the chief cheerleader. We've got an amazing team of people here, senior living focused, and just appreciate being able to welcome guests like Jeffrey Wipf here. So without further ado, Jeffrey, take it away.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. My name is Jeffrey Wipf. I am the VP of IT for Cassia. Cassia is a Twin Cities-based, faith-based nonprofit. We're in the senior healthcare field, obviously. We have 60 buildings, primarily in Minnesota, but a few in North Dakota, several in Iowa, a couple in Colorado, and one in Florida. We do have a mix of nursing home and assisted living, and our trend is towards assisted living a little bit more recently, but we do have both. Most of our buildings are owned. We do have a couple facilities that we manage for owners, and we try to manage them in a very same way, both owned and managed, just for consistency and standardization and the ability to manage yourself well across. But, thank you.
Thank you. Well, like Cece was saying, the art of system selection. Cece, I think it's a little bit coincidental or not that we're talking about art and not science, and you're creative and collaborative in that nature. So I just want to remind people, like she pointed out, it is an art on system selection. It isn't a science. It doesn't mean there isn't a formula to follow. And I think as Jeff, you're sharing, for your portfolios, you guys, there are system selections that a process that you go through. Do you guys have a particular process that you follow?
Yeah, and we do. Obviously, the one I'm thinking about, and I think in the past, in planning for this session, we kind of lean towards nurse call or the call light system, and so we are a merged organization. About five years ago, two peers came together in a friendly merger. And obviously, when that happened, you start looking at all your solutions and validating, do you want to go with what one group had, the other group had, or something new? And so we went through a lot of evaluations on all of those systems. And when we got to Nurse Call, we made that decision probably about 2.5 years ago. And it was an home office specifically decision that brought operations, clinical, IT, and even our building planning team into the conversation. And we looked at what both sides of the organization had. We looked at other outside vendors, and we came up with a must-have list, a nice-to-have list. And then we just started talking to vendors. And as it turns out, we ended up coming back to the same vendors that we had as independent groups. But we made one change on the communication side of it. So as at a high level, we did have a solution we put into assisted living that tended to be wireless. In the care centers where we want a little bit more stability, a little bit more less maintenance, we went with a wired solution. And then we put an iPhone app over the top of both of them, so that our alerts and notifications and our texting and voice communication could have the same format. But from an organizational standpoint, we wanted to get into the reporting and analytics and things like that would funnel up to the organization. So with that combination, we did go through a fairly lengthy process to evaluate that. And I reporting after about 2.5 years, we're at about 90% of our sites are at that standard. And so we've done a lot of work in the last 2.5 years to move that direction.
Awesome. So so a couple things, right? And this is drawing from some of our previous tech talks. You didn't do this alone, right? It was collaborative. It was cross-functional, multiple teams contributed to their various perspectives, right? In this system selection initiative and effort, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. How much time would you say you spent in that in establishing and going through that collaborative effort?
Yeah.
Like
good question. I suppose I would assume that 2 or 3 of us started doing some discovery in the summer that summer, and in that we worked with our teams and developed our list of requirements, and then we did an initial review of providers and against a set of pros and cons and requirements. And that took us through the fall. I think we brought the entire team together to review everything in the October, November timeframe. So it was probably a 4-month process, but keep in mind that everybody at the table had been involved, with senior healthcare, with call systems. And so, I think once we got down to that last month or so where we were making a final decision, those conversations were basically, they were pretty fluid conversations.
Right. Yeah, like you said, most of the people, there was a level of familiarity of the topic and platform, if you will, and possibly even some of the vendors that you may have been considering. So you collaborative, intentional, you invested time, you created 3 separate sort of buckets or lists, like must have, would like to have, and kind of nice to have. Right? Was that the 3 buckets you described?
Yeah, I think what we did at the end of the day, especially for the vendors that came in on the final presentations, is gave them an opportunity to kind of give us some out-of-box thinking. Maybe our perspective was based on our past experience, but yet they had introduced new things in their technologies or in their equipment that we were not aware of. So we gave them an opportunity for us to consider that type of thing, those type of things, and whether or not we wanted to, pay the extra to get that extra functionality, or, so it was, so it was kind of that was part of the fluid conversation at the end of the process.
Right. And that effort, that initiative was in particular on nurse call and where the product allowed, you were doing e-call for, say, assisted living community portfolios. Is that right?
Right. Both like I said, we were putting everybody everybody was in the decision-making process, but we were making a decision for nursing homes, assisted living, and then the communication tool over the top.
Okay, right. So really it was those 2 systems for the product, plus also the communication package, how you're going to communicate. Perfect.
Exactly.
So yeah, for our audience, mostly, it's not only exclusively design, but I think one of the challenges when you're sitting at a design table talking about a conceptual product, right, where our job is to try and extract from a customer, from an operator, what is their standard? What are they looking for? What are they hoping to achieve? So you laid out some core principles of the art of system selection, that you do need buy-in, you need people's time, and you need clarity from the organization, because at the end of the day, that information we take and then can convert into plans and specs, and we can go forth and conquer and produce something that will meet and achieve an objective. So, and like you said, once you did that, it's a 4-month process, and then it took you're still wrapping up, but it's about a 2-year initiative once you started rolling it out. Is that correct?
Yeah, 2.5 years. We that particular year, some of the sites that had an older nurse call system got notified by that provider that they were terminating services in February of the following year. So when we made the decision in October and November, we had about 5 sites that had to be off under the new system by February. So that initial rush was pretty intense.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
No, absolutely. That totally makes sense. And then I think CC, some of this, this lays out a stack as far as the column of e-call and nurse call. There are other things that we talk about that consume our attention. And I think that's in the 3rd bucket that Jeff had mentioned was, hey, we also asked our folks to dream a little bit, or we asked our vendors, like, hey, show us what is possible. But we throw the word like IoT around, we throw around resident, systems and selections.
Big question I have is, I know what IoT stands for. So I will pat myself on the back for that, but I also know that it's kind of, we talked about it earlier, it's a squishy term. What Jeff, what does IoT mean to you? And then Matt, I'm going to ask you to give your perspective on it as well after
Well,
Matt or after Jeff shares.
I just thought it was missing some letters. I thought it was missing an ID in front of it. So that's
IoT.
So, yeah. So,
Okay, on this leap day, I'm going to leap right over that and again ask Jeff, please tell me what and share with the group. Talk to us about how IoT plays out in your organization and how you address it.
Yeah, so IoT or Internet of Things basically is an internet, anything that touches the internet can be under the umbrella of Internet of Things. And so a number of years ago when we were in technology, everything was on-premise based. You had an application on your computer. You connected to a server on your computer, a server on your network, and everything was kind of local. And over the last number of years, everything has gone internet based. And so we know that internet based on software and systems and backups and all that is present. And so all that, you know, in one way or another could be said Internet of Things. But where we think about it as an organization is we have our standard configurations, and that kind of goes in an area of our network or area of our organization that we kind of manage very tightly. The security and all that is in place. When we start talking about Internet of Things, we realize there's a little bit of research and development, a little bit of discovery that goes into those devices that are going to hit the internet, but we still want to use them in our network, in our organization. A couple examples come to mind. We had a provider that was encouraging us to look at some vitals machines. And our staff would take these wireless vital machines into a residence room, take the vitals, and then they would automatically propagate our health software. And it was wireless, and so we had to need to connect it to the network. But because it wasn't a device that we've done a lot of checking on, we didn't want it on our administrative wireless or even our nursing wireless. So we put it on an Internet of Things wireless network and give it a little bit more latitude. And so as our organization and as our functional areas are looking at solution, we will look at using that Internet of Things for the different discovery and the different items that they want to look at, largely internet web-based, and yet it protects our back-end environment from anything, because we don't necessarily, if you will, control, you know, the tool, the solution, or the product.
right. It's the IoT squishiness, if you will, that CC is talking about. You basically would be non-core IT components like Wi-Fi access points, network switches, you know, computers, phones, your normal traditional IP items, correct?
Yeah.
And the IoT things would be something like Bluetooth, low energy, wearables, Zigbee, you know, thermostats. Sometimes you start talking about appliances, and like you said, you talked about some vitals, some blood pressure monitors, other machines, and that sort of thing that can connect through and provide additional data sets. So art of system selection, right? There is a you need to accommodate the exploration of how does this product fit. Can we take advantage of what it's promising, what it's offering to our ops team or our residents or patients, or, you know, the occupants of who we're, the communities that you're serving, right? So in the art of system selection, you need to have a planning component. And I think the question that I'm leading to for you, Jeff, is how do you identify something that you're going to test, right? And say, okay, let's go ahead and move forward with this. And you mentioned, alluded to, hey, we didn't have enough time to truly test if this was met the sniff test or the security test, so we're just going to put it on a different network. But do you want to take us through some of?
Yeah, so we got a very timely conversation. To touch on, just to get a little context, as an organization, we put together a software committee. So it's part of that process you were talking earlier. And it's broader than a software committee, but in any functional area or anybody in the organization that wants to bring technology to the organization, they bring it through the software committee, and we've got an evaluation process to, evaluate it against budget, evaluate it against scope, evaluate it against organizational strategies. And then once the approval happens, then, we start figuring out how that solution is gonna, be rolled out. One of the solutions that hit our committee last month, and we did a little bit of an update, is the Alexa, and using that in various areas. And from a security standpoint, and if you have now experience with it, the Alexa has in the past been a huge security risk for a lot of reasons. It's a huge HIPAA risk for a lot of reasons. So we've got a lot to evaluate. But to your question, Matt, we are currently in our process with the Alexa to figure out, how to integrate it, if to integrate it into our organization. On one hand, we've got residents that are bringing the Alexa into their residential room, connecting it to our guest Wi-Fi, and using it for, what's the weather, who won the Twins game, that type of stuff, which is very natural and normal. But when those Alexas starts getting out onto our activities area or even our clinical area, we start getting into HIPAA concerns. And, somebody can ask a question and its AI side of it is going to learn and memorize, and you start asking about diagnosis and people's condition, you've got a security risk there. So to your point, we are just starting our discovery on the organizational use of Alexis and how to integrate that. But it is part of our software committee structure. And right now we're just dealing with the activities group and keeping the use very, very simple for music therapies and trivia and things like that. But we know that there's risk, and we know that there's a likely expansion of that as we go forward.
Right.
That's really good to know. I want to jump in. I'm mindful that we've got 7 minutes left, and we've not even talked about money yet, about budgeting. The funnest part, right, Matt, where you were ahead of me, huh?
For sure. No, I'm on the same page as you.
Oh, okay, good. I'm going to ask the question in a couple. Just if you could touch on that, the different, for example, there's procurement, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's first. So if we could talk about that, Jeff, either. Particularly if it's in a new project. I know that you've gone through a merger and you had to do some standardization, but for many of the folks on our call today and the Sage audience, they're dealing with new projects of one kind or another, whether it's a brand new build or it's a retrofit and a remodel. When a system is selected, can you both speak to how you about the budgeting process? How can you make sure you've got realistic expectations with your budget and differentiate between that first cost versus the ongoing operational cost?
Yeah, if we're talking like just from a design standpoint, as we try to frame up the ballpark, if you will. We've got to frame up the box and equip the project to be able to identify, can the project afford this, right? But as Jeff has pointed out too, when they have systems that they know and they want, it does help bring a lot more clarity and definition to the budgeting process. You don't have to leave as many variables and contingencies, but that's, so first you start with what do you know, and then you move into allowances, if you will, and then there's of course industry knowledge. Jeff had mentioned, like, a lot of his team, they were familiar with nurse call. They knew what it was. They understand the OpEx side too, so they know what the maintenance costs, they know what the carry costs and the consumption. So in budgeting and for procurement and also for operations, it's not just a CapEx, a purchase, but it's also the operation of those systems that should play a role certainly in the budgeting process. I think for our audience that are in the design side, that can introduce some challenges in the world of tech, just because tech tends to be higher on an OpEx, and those costs can be difficult to get your arms around. I don't know, Jeff, what do you have to add there?
Well, again, I've been in senior healthcare for 10 years and been working on nurse calls for the large majority of that time. And so I've put together many budgets on both new builds as well as retro. And working with the same groups over years, you develop a formula. And I basically have a budget built right now that if I know how many rooms and I know how many rooms and I know the functionality that's going to go into it, I can probably get pretty close to a budget just in my experience. But obviously you have to go back to the providers and fine tooth and get the current numbers. And so from a budgeting standpoint, when we start a new project, I have a pretty good idea of where that budget's going to come in. The retrofits end up being a little bit more difficult because there's nuances at some of our sites. I mean, some of our sites were built in the 60s and 70s, and the provider has to get in and look at the nuances of that. But right now, I would say that I've developed my templates, and I just go in and update the templates as we gain experience or as we enter new projects and learn of the upticks that they have annually.
Absolutely. So for system selection, once you've picked what a horse, if you will, right, that system's been selected, as Jeff's saying, it becomes easier then to build a more consistent formulary for generating a budget. As we look into the future for harnessing the newer things like IoT, and how do you take on like your software committee as they're receiving new concepts and ideas, I'm sure part of the process and one of the challenges that they may face too is, what does it cost to acquire this technology? What does it cost for us to implement it? And what does it cost for us to operate that? And then how do we monetize that? How does that plug into our OpEx model? And can we afford to? Can we not afford to? Is that also a role of that team?
Exactly. There's a huge section of our process that's all about funding and budgeting and again the strategic value that the solution brings to us. Right.
And your software team, right? The software committee, I think, is that what you called it?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Again, I think that's also a cross-discipline, multidisciplinary, right? It's not just IT. Right.
Oh,
and it's also not just ops. And I think that's the other critical piece to remember, folks, is that Jeff hit the nail on the head. They pulled together a team of people to collaborate so that they could get the various data points and inputs to then mold it. And sometimes there's some give and take, but if you don't have that data, you're going to open yourself up to a blind spot, to a gap, to an assumption. And that's when challenges hit. And I think that's what ends up being challenging, especially when you're looking at and evaluating new systems, because it's critical. I mean, technology, at the end of the day, your tech systems should be helping streamline operations, right? Like, people are meant to deliver care to people. Technology should be empowering that. It should be equipping people to spend more time with people. At least that's this humble guy's opinion.
And on that note, I think that's a fair note to end on. We are at time. We're at 1:29. And I want to take a minute to thank Matt and Jeff for giving us, again, like we said, 30 minutes just flies by. We could talk about this for a couple more hours easily. And we may at some point, because you now have the power to tell us what you would like to talk about next or in upcoming editions of Tech Talk. So for our attendees today, those who've logged in for today's Tech Talk, there should be a survey that's popped up. Please complete it. Let us know what's on your mind. How do you think this one went? What sorts of topics might you like to see us cover in future editions of Tech Talk? And remember too, this session, if you found it valuable, will be available on demand. We'll send you a link to the recording. It's also available on Sage's website, on our YouTube channel, etc. So watch it again if you care to, or if you think something came up here that you would like to share with a sponsor or a colleague of some sort, please feel free to send this session along. Thanks so much for joining us. I think at this point we'll call it a wrap and catch you next month for Tech Talk. Thanks so much. Happy Leap Day. Make your extra day count.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks,
Thanks
Jeff.
so much.